This is the third part, the series about the Roman and the Byzantine emperors. I want to talk about Antoninus Pius, his successor Marcus Aurelius, his co-emperor Lucius Verus, and the usurper Aurelius Cassius. This speech is mainly it concerns mainly Marcus Aurelius, but it includes the other three minor emperors as well. Now, Antoninus Pius became emperor in 138. He succeeded Hadrian. And Antoninus Pius, first of all, when he became emperor, he learned that a group of people were condemned to be killed by Hadrian. And what happened was that Antoninus Pius ordered the Senate to stop the execution. That's one of the reasons why he earned the cognomen Pius. And then, not long after that, the Senate, they wanted to punish, let's say, Hadrian by not proclaiming him divine, because he had executed 4 senators in the earlier part of his reign. And that was quite unjust, because these 4 senators, they tried to kill Hadrian. He only did it in self-defense. And Antoninus Pius begged the Senate to deify Hadrian after his death. So for these 2 reasons, the pardoning of these people who were condemned by Hadrian and the deification of Hadrian, he earned the cognomen Pius, Antoninus Pius, and he was the founder of the Antonine dynasty also. Part of his will claimed, the main clause of his will claimed that when Hadrian died, Antoninus Pius would succeed him. But Antoninus Pius was obliged to adopt in his turn Marcus Aurelius as the senior emperor and Lucius Verus as the minor emperor, his co-emperor. So, Antoninus Pius's reign was considered to be a peaceful one. Well, in fact, there were several wars. There were actually 7 campaigns during his 23-year reign, and we have little knowledge about these campaigns. Now, in 142, the Brigantes, a Celtic tribe somewhere in Britain, rebelled, and they were defeated. See, so we don't really know who the commander was, who the proconsul, the legate was who defeated them. We don't actually know about the battles that took place. We just know that he defeated them, and even the dates are quite vague too. In 144, the Moors, the Numidian, the Berber tribes rebelled. They were defeated by a Roman proconsul, and they were forced to flee to the Atlas Mountains. In 145, the Germans rebelled, and they were again defeated. In 157, perhaps, the Dacians rebelled. Now, the Dacians, they were recently conquered by Trajan, as we learned in a previous video. And they rebelled, and they were again defeated. So that's 4 campaigns we hardly know anything about. And sometime during his reign, the Egyptians rebelled, and they were defeated, again by an anonymous legate or proconsul. And the Alans rebelled. Actually, they didn't rebel, they made a raid, and they were repelled by the Roman forces. Again, we don't know who beat them or how they did it. The 7th and final campaign that took place in the reign of Antoninus Pius was the force of Scythians. They besieged the Greek colony Olbia, and a Roman force was sent to relieve the colony. And when the Roman troops arrived, the Scythians departed. The Scythian tribes, and there was hardly any fighting. Or if there was, it was restricted to a few skirmishes. So that's about it, as far as battles were concerned. It was a relatively peaceful reign, but there were at least 7 campaigns. Now, well, not everything was actually was rosy in his campaign. We see that in his rule. We see that Attilius Titianus and a certain Priscus, that they planned to overthrow and murder Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius was tipped off the conspirators were arrested and executed. We don't know when it happened, actually. And finally, we learn from the historian Gustav that Aurelius Cassius also planned to overthrow Antoninus Pius, but for some reason he was not prosecuted. Now, Aurelius Cassius would become a usurper in the year 175. He rebelled against his best friend Marcus Aurelius. He was a half-Greek, half-Jewish aristocrat who threw up the scale. He was one of the finest commanders of his time. So we see that even then he was trying to tip the balances and become an emperor. Antoninus Pius died in 161 AD after a 23-year reign. Now, the ironic thing about Antoninus Pius was that he has no history. Some historian quoted, and I quote back, that Antoninus Pius has no history because he was so good. Nothing wrong actually happened during his rule. He did nothing wrong. He killed no one. He did nothing worthy of talking about. So that's why the sources we have about him are so limited and few. So he killed no one. He didn't kill his relatives. He didn't actually debauch anyone. And he died in 161 after a 23-year reign, and he's considered one of the finest emperors of Rome. He built wonderful edifices, and there were many philosophers flourishing during his reign. Now, we go on to Marcus Aurelius. Now, in 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius succeeds Antoninus Pius along with Lucius Verus as his co-emperor. In 161 AD, Marcus and Lucius, they are appointed consuls. Now, why they were appointed consuls? That we must remember that these are not real consuls. I mean, these people were not elected. The Senate did not approve them. Everything was prearranged by Marcus himself, by Lucius Verus, and a few of his senators, his high-ranking senators. Now, they were appointed consul in the year 161 to actually prove that they were the new emperors and they were co-emperors. Now, we see that happening when Nerva adopted Trajan. You see that the pair of them became consuls in 97, 98 AD. So that was a way to show to the people that these are the co-emperors and these are new emperors. Now, on the onset of Marcus's reign, tragedy struck the empire. It all happened in Armenia. You see, Armenia, as well as Assyria and Mesopotamia, and the smaller buffer states, they were buffer states between Parthia. Parthia was the only empire that was capable of hurting Rome. Apart from a few German or Scythian or Dacian tribes, you see these barbaric tribes, they were not organized enough. They had the manpower, but they were not organized like the Parthians. So Parthia was the real threat. And Armenia was a battleground between Rome for centuries. Before that, and for centuries after the reign of Marcus Aurelius. So what happened was that the Parthians invaded Armenia, and the Romans decided to strike back. The commander, the Parthians were ruled by a capable Shah, who was called Vologases IV. Several coins of the Shah are preserved. Now, Severianus was the commander in Armenia at the time, and the Greek wise man or mysticist or priest with the name of Alexander of Avontikos, he prophesied that Severianus would defeat the Parthians. And Severianus took his word for real, and he invaded Armenia. And what happened was a disaster. The Roman troops were surrounded and massacred. And not long after that, the Parthians also defeated Atilius Cornelianus. Now, We don't really know what happened in Armenia, but what is probable is that the Parthians, they used the hit and run tactic, the one they used when they defeated Crassus at Haran in 53 BC. So they used the horse archers. Now the Parthians and the Scythian allies, they were quick. They struck with the arrow and then they fell back. They struck with the arrow and then they held back. The heavy armed Romans could not catch up with them. They were excellent horsemen also, and they used Saracens as well. So that's probably why they defeated the Romans twice. And remember, this is just when Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus are appointed emperors. So imagine becoming an emperor, and a few months after that, you suffered 2 disasters. Now in the following year, 162 AD, the Britons revolted. They were defeated by Julius Agricola, and Julius Agricola is probably related to the elder Julius Agricola, the writer and the son-in-law of Tacitus, who was betrayed and executed by Domitian. Now, in the same year, the German Hatti, they raided parts of Roman Germania and Raetia, but they were defeated by Filius Victorianus. Now, in the following year, 163, the Romans counterattacked. They invaded Armenia once more, and this time they sent Statius Priscus, a capable commander. The Romans captured Artaxata by assault, the capital of Armenia, and soon after that, with hardly any resistance, Armenia fell to Rome once more. The Parthians quickly evacuated the province. Now in the following year, 164, the Romans invaded Assyria and Mesopotamia proper, just like Trajan did a few years earlier. The Romans under Aurelius Cassius, now we see Aurelius Cassius again, this Greek guy, this Greek aristocrat. They defeated the Parthians near the Ephatus River with the use of catapults, onagers and scorpions and other missiles. See, it was long range, so they hit the Parthians back with their own tactics. Now in the following year, 165, the Romans finally captured all of Mesopotamia and Assyria. Aurelius Cassius defeated the Parthians in a pitched battle somewhere in the province. The Romans captured and burnt Seleucia. Seleucia, at the Tigris River, was a Greek colony, and what happened was that Aurelius Cassius, he entered the city as an ally. You see, he was a Greek himself, most of the colonists were Greeks also, and he pretended to be their friends. But what happened was that he betrayed them, he treacherously attacked them, and he killed many of them, and they even sacked the temple of Apollo, which was considered to be blasphemy, sacrilege. Soon after that, the Romans captured Ctesiphon. Statius Priscus captured Dura Evropos, a city with a large Jewish community. The Romans also captured Babylon, and they seized many treasures. Now, because of the ancients believed that because the Romans they looted the temples and they captured gold, they were punished by a plague, and truly a plague, a serious plague broke out in 165. So even though the Parthians were humiliated and driven out of Mesopotamia, Syria, and Armenia proper, and the smaller kingdoms of Sorini or Duini, the Romans got a plague instead of a victory. And we also see that Lucius Verus, the co-emperor, he actually did nothing about the Parthians and the Armenians and their other allies. He spent most of his time partying, hunting, drinking, reading poetry at Antioch. He stayed back at Antioch, and it was Marcus Aurelius in Rome who directed affairs with his captains. Priscus, Aurelius Cassius, and the other commanders. And the people learned to despise Lucius Verus. The people soon realized that it was Marcus Aurelius who was the true leader. Now in the following year, the Romans were faced by large Germanic and Scythian tribes and Dacian tribes. There was a large coalition. Now the Longobards fell to Rome once more. The Parthians quickly evacuated the province. Now in the following year, 164, the Romans invaded Assyria and Mesopotamia proper, just like Trajan did a few years earlier. The Romans under Aurelius Cassius, now we see Aurelius Cassius again, this Greek guy, this Greek aristocrat. They defeated the Parthians near the Euphrates River with the use of catapults, onagers and scorpions and other missiles. See, it was long range, so they hit the Parthians back with their own tactics. Now in the following year, 165, the Romans finally captured all of Mesopotamia and Assyria. Aurelius Cassius defeated the Parthians in a pitched battle somewhere in the province. The Romans captured and burnt Seleucia. Seleucia, at the Tigris River, was a Greek colony, and what happened was that Aurelius Cassius, he entered the city as an ally. You see, he was a Greek himself, most of the colonists were Greeks also, and he pretended to be their friends. But what happened was that he betrayed them, he treacherously attacked them, and he killed many of them, and they even sacked the temple of Apollo, which was considered to be blasphemy, sacrilege. Soon after that, the Romans captured Ctesiphon. Statius Priscus captured Dura Evropos, a city with a large Jewish community. The Romans also captured Babylon, and they seized many treasures. Now, because of the ancients believed that because the Romans they looted the temples and they captured gold, they were punished by a plague, and truly a serious plague broke out in 165. So even though the Parthians were humiliated and driven out of Mesopotamia, Syria, and Armenia proper, and the smaller kingdoms of Sorini or Duini, the Romans got a plague instead of a victory. And we also see that Lucius Verus, the co-emperor, he actually did nothing about the Parthians and the Armenians and their other allies. He spent most of his time partying, hunting, drinking, reading poetry at Antioch. He stayed back at Antioch, and it was Marcus Aurelius in Rome who directed affairs with his captains. Priscus, Aurelius Cassius, and the other commanders. And the people learned to despise Lucius Verus. The people soon realized that it was Marcus Aurelius who was the true leader. Now in the following year, the Romans were faced by large Germanic and Scythian tribes and Dacian tribes. There was a large coalition. Now the Longobards, some 6,000 strong, they reached the Danube, and Marcus Vindex defeated them in a pitched battle. Soon afterwards, the force of Aurelius Cassius crossed the Danube, and they massacred 3,000 Sarmatians. And again we see how cruel and ruthless Aurelius Cassius was. He discovered that some of his officers didn't actually take part in this campaign across the Danube, and he had them arrested and crucified. Why? For being on the offensive? Doesn't really make sense, does it? Meanwhile, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, who had recently returned from Antioch, they marched to northern Italy, and they defeated a group of Germans. Now, on the return journey, Lucius Verus died at the city of Atinium of an apoplexy, and Marcus Aurelius became the sole ruler. The fourth battle took place when Helvidius Pertinax defeated the Germans at Raetia. Now, after Marcus Aurelius is appointed sole emperor, he was lucky enough to have 4 years of peace. And during this time, he could supplement his forces by the youngsters that were of the military age. People began to recover from the plagues. Now, 170 was a terrible year for Rome. In 170, Rome nearly fell. There were wars in all fronts. It was truly amazing, the coalition that took place. Now the Kosovoks were a small Dacian tribe. They rebelled from Rome, and they crossed the Danube. They crossed parts of Thrace, Macedonia, Thessaly, and they went as far south as Phokis, and they reached a small town called Eladia. Now, how they marched so far south is unknown. And then a small Greek militia under the commander Minisovolos defeated them in a battle. However, the commander himself was killed. Now the Mauritanians, Berber tribesmen, they crossed from Morocco, what is today Morocco. They went to Spain, the province of Vetica, and some other parts of Spain, and they raided it. And a group of unknown legates marched to Spain, and they defeated them. Again, we don't really know what happened or who these legates were. It's clearly stated by the sources that there was a lack of manpower during this year. And Aurelius, to fill the gaps, you see that thousands of people were killed. The Romans were killed. Some of them were killed in battles, some of them were killed in the civil wars that took place after the death of Nero. We see pestilence. And Marcus Aurelius was forced to free and to train slaves, gladiators, and he brought robbers from Dalmatia and Dardania, and they were incorporated in the Roman forces. Now, now the Romans defeated the Quadi and the Marcomanni in battle on the Danube, and the German force included female warriors, Amazon warriors too. Now we see that the Quadi and the Marcomanni, according to Florus, in 8 AD, the Quadi and the Marcomanni, they could muster a force of 70,000 men. That was in 8 AD. So in 170 AD, and the Romans, under Tiberius, Augustus was still alive back then, and his successor Tiberius was there, and he declined battle. So 162 years later, these 70,000 men would soon multiply. And so we can see how dangerous they were in this year. Thankfully they were defeated by Claudius Pompeianus, who married Marcus Aurelius' daughter, Lucilla, and Helvius Pertinax, the future emperor. Now, sadly, Verus Caesar, one of Marcus Aurelius' sons, died of the pestilence, the name of it. Another German force crossed into northern Italy, and they captured and sacked the cities of Oppiderium, and they besieged Aquileia. Meanwhile, the Roman force under Clemens defeated the Lacringi, who were either a German force or a Dacian force. Another group of German federates who were settled in Italy, they rebelled and they captured Ravenna, and Ravenna later became Rome's capital city, not Rome, not Medolianum, Ravenna. So they captured Ravenna, and Marcus Aurelius sent a force and they drove them out of Ravenna and they killed them. But we don't actually know who did it or how they did it. So we see that the Romans faced war in all fronts, and they suffered from a lack of manpower. In the following year, 171, Marcus Vindex was defeated and killed in a battle with the Marcomanni. And Marcus Aurelius himself marched north and he defeated them in a second battle. 172 AD, the following year, a group of Egyptian peasants called the Vocoli, which in Latin means people of a pasture, they rebelled under a priest called Isidoros. They killed several centurions placed in several cities. They defeated a Roman legion in battle, and they even attacked Alexandria themselves, but they were repelled from the walls. And who else? Avidius Cassius arrived in Egypt, and he subdued them. We don't actually know how he did it. 174, the following year, Marcus Aurelius himself fought a hard battle with a coalition of Germans and Sarmatian and Scythian tribesmen. In the earlier stages of the battle, the Germans were winning, but then the sources talk of divine intervention. There was rain pouring in the faces of the Germans, and there was lightning that struck the Germans themselves. And after that, the Romans got courage and they defeated their enemies. Soon after that, the Romans seized the German chieftain Aurelius and they sent him to Alexandria as an imperial hostage. Meanwhile, a German force, the Hafki, they invaded Belgium, the province of Belgica, but they were defeated by Helvius Pertinax, the future emperor. And meanwhile, Julius Julianus, the future emperor, defeated a force of Hatti in battle, but we don't know where or how. Now, in the following year, 175, Julius Julianus and Helvius Pertinax, the two future emperors, were appointed consuls for the great victories against the German tribes in the following and in the previous year, in the sort of thanks. Now, Marcus Aurelius himself defeated a group of Scythian Iazyes in battle, and the reason why he was defeated, because the battle took place in the frozen Danube, and the barbarian Scythians, they began to slip over. They could not form proper military positions, and that's why they were defeated. But then Marcus Aurelius became ill, and Faustina, his wife, played a dirty game. Now, practically everyone knew, and Marcus Aurelius included, that his wife Faustina had an affair with the rising star, Aurelius Cassius. He actually knew about it. The Historia Augusta mentions that he actually caught them having breakfast together. He just walked off. The reason why Marcus Aurelius didn't arrest or execute Aurelius Cassius was that he didn't want to blacken his name in the Senate by killing one of his commanders. So he turned a blind eye to what Aurelius Cassius was actually doing. And Faustina sent Aurelius Cassius, who was in Egypt, and he recently restored the province. She sent a letter that Aurelius was dying, so he could assume power. And most of the soldiers who were stationed in Egypt actually believed that. The commander Flavius Calvicinus and a few other senators, they went along with Aurelius Cassius. Aurelius Cassius also tried to bribe the commanders of Cappadocia and Bithynia to rebel, but they refused to do so, thankfully. Now, Marcus Aurelius soon recovered from his illness. He made a truce with the Scythians and he marched to Egypt. Now, some of the Scythian tribes then, they offered to help Rome against the usurper. So you see, so from that we can see there was a sense of honour and pride in the Germans and the Scythians. They might have been fighting to the death with the Romans, but when they learned, they admired actually, Marcus Aurelius actually, and when they heard about the usurpation of Aurelius Cassius, they offered to help him, but he refused that help out of a sense of pride. Now, before Aurelius even arrived in Alexandria, the Romans realized that Aurelius was not dead at all, and Aurelius Cassius had actually betrayed them. And they killed Cassius and one of his sons. Now, Aurelius, he did not hurt anyone, and even Flavius Calvisius, the governor who had betrayed him, he was simply exiled to an island with a small guard. He even burnt all the incriminating evidence, all the papers, so that no one could be prosecuted, then and in the future. Aurelius Cassius died after a rule of 3 months and a few days. So that was the end of one of Rome's finest generals at the time. In the following year, 176, and we see how Marcus Aurelius was lenient. But some people, some historians accuse Marcus Aurelius of not being actually lenient, but being hypocritical. He wanted to appear to be a kind and gentle guy, so he could be deified by the Senate. Some people claim that he did it out of vanity. The following year, 176, Faustinus, Commodus, did what Hadrian did. And when Trajan lost all these men, thousands of men fighting the Parthians, and he captured Assyria, Hadrian proved to be ungrateful by withdrawing. Commodus proved to be ungrateful by withdrawing his troops. Tiberius, years before that, proved to be ungrateful when Germanicus defeated the Germans and recaptured all that territory, and he was ordered to fall back. So, two films were actually released by Hollywood. One of them was released in 1964. It was called The Fall of the Roman Empire. And recently, The Gladiator was released. Now, these two movies are really far from the truth. They have no historical value whatsoever. For example, in the Gladiator, we see that Marcus Aurelius dies, and Commodus succeeds him, and he dies during the games, during the funeral games, which is quite funny actually. And it's a shame really how all that money was spent, and a proper film about Marcus Aurelius and his successors was never released. Marcus Aurelius wrote a book. He wrote it in Greek, and it's called The Meditations, or To Myself. This book, which belongs to the Stoic philosophical school, is admired by people such as the Byzantine writer Aretas of Caesarea, Bill Clinton, Goethe, Frederick the Great, and others. And we can find it in the lower library. Now we want to talk about some of the intellectuals. Now, one of the tutors of Marcus Aurelius was Frodo. Frodo was a Berber. He was a Latinized Berber, and he was one of his tutors. Contemporaries are Alexander of Avanticus, the mystic, the Greek mystic. We have Lucian, who was a Syrian, and he was a satirical writer. We've got the Greek benefactor Herodes Atticus, the man who had his villa in Kifisia, and he built theatres, temples, baths everywhere, from Troy to Athens to Corinth. We see that some of Marcus Aurelius' tutors are Quintus Junius Rusticus, Annius Macer, Caninius Celer. Near contemporaries are Aelius Aristides, who spent most of his time in Bergamo, writing about meditations and medicine. We see Polyanos, who wrote a book about strategy, and it was based on an earlier work by Sextus Frontinus, and it was dedicated to Lucius, Verus, and Marcus Aurelius. We see the Greek tutor Alexander of Cordio, one of his tutors, and of course many others. Now, there were many edifices being erected during his reign. A few of them are the steel column in Rome. Actually went there myself, and it's quite similar to the steel Trajan erected, depicting his victories. We have a big statue of Marcus Aurelius outside the Capitolian Museum. We see a large theatre in Lectus Magna, which is in modern-day Libya, the old Phoenician colony. We see an arch in Ia, Tripoli, which is the capital of Libya, and of course other places too. Now this is a bust of Antoninus Pius, the good emperor. This gate at Svetla is one of Antoninus' edifices, one of the many he created. This is Lucius Verus, Marcus Antonius' colleague, the weak and ineffective emperor who spent most of his day hunting, drinking. Now this is Marcus Aurelius himself. You can see him here at a young age. Statue of Marcus Aurelius. Here is a bust of Faustina, Aurelius' wife. His wife who had betrayed him with Aurelius Cassius. Here's a coin of Lucius IV, the Parthian king, who defeated the Romans twice at the very onset of Marcus Aurelius' reign. Now this is the column Marcus Aurelius, quite similar to that, the one that Trajan built after the Dacian Wars. Now this is a triumphal arch. It's found in modern day Tripoli in Libya, the old Phoenician city of Oia, and it's from the reign of Marcus Aurelius. And this is the base of the column of Antoninus Pius, the lower part, and we can see him and his wife. We can see Marcus Aurelius outside the Capitolian Museum of Rome, horseback. The original one is in the museum, the one outside the piazza is a copy. And this is the famous Ctesiphon Gate in modern day Iraq. The troops of Aurelius Cassius captured and sacked the city. And these are Parthian cavalry archers. The Roman troops of Aurelius Cassius and Statius Priscus probably faced something like that. And this is Commodus, Marcus Aurelius' evil son, the corrupt person who gave up the provinces of Marcomannia and Quadia.